Hi everyone, welcome to this evening's webinar. I'm Georgia Tipke. I'm the Chair of Young Rail Professionals Northwest Region. Young Rail Professionals are delighted to be able to support Rail Safety Week this week. There's been some really good events so far and we're really looking forward to this evening. So thank you all for attending. I'd like to hand over to John, who's going to do a quick introduction about Rail Safety Week in case this is the first event that you've attended this week.
Thanks very much, Georgia. Hello and welcome everybody. Absolutely delighted to be joining the YRP tonight in this industry collaboration for Rail Safety Week. Rail Safety Week is an industry collaboration, as I say, in promoting safety messages across the industry, and that's for our customers, our workforce, and there's lots of different companies involved, from Network Rail and the train operating companies, but also the supply chain and supporters of the rail industry as well. Generally, we would be face to face. We would be doing lots of stuff on stations, depots, trains, and within our offices to promote messages of safety. But for obvious reasons, this year we're doing a lot more online. So there's a series of online events. Some are being delivered through Learn Live, and some are also collaborations with people like the YRP as tonight. You can get more information about the events that are ongoing from railsafetyweek.org, and you can sign up there. But delighted to be joining you tonight, and thanks very much, Georgia. I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, John. So tonight we've got Wendy. I'd like to apologise in advance on Wendy's behalf. We're having trouble with Wendy's webcam, but Wendy's a really big supporter of YRP and has hosted many great events for YRP. So I believe this one will be no different. So Wendy, are you ready to take over?
I certainly am. Thanks, Georgia. Yeah, so today we're talking about failure. So it's really interesting that in the last half an hour, I have found things out about my computer and failure that I just didn't know, but I'm going to have to accept. So here I am, hopefully in audio, but unfortunately not with video. So I haven't got my lippy on, but we are here and we're going to be talking about how well-being, safety, performance and failure are all really, really related. So firstly, let me just introduce myself a little bit for those of you that don't know me. So my name is Wendy McCristal. I'm the director of a company called the Mental Wealth Company that I set up a couple of years ago. This week, actually, it's just been our second anniversary. I've spent 25 years in kind of off-highway heavy manufacturing and lastly in the railway industry. I'm an engineer and I'm a human factors specialist, so a human scientist really. About 3 years ago, I became quite mentally unwell and took 6 months off work. And it's at that point that I actually wanted to, after I'd kind of got better, I wanted to come and share some of the insights that I'd got about human behaviour and upskilling yourself and how that can help keep you well. And what I do now for companies, mainly within the rail industry, but across other domains as well, is take those learnings and look at how companies can apply them that, in their big picture problems, so things like safety, productivity. So hopefully today it's I'm going to just bring you a flavour of some of the work that I'm doing, and specifically I'm going to be talking about a little piece of work that I'm doing with one of my clients. So first of all, hello, really good to see you here. Tonight we're going to be really looking at why bother. Why is it that we really want to bring wellbeing into the organisation? And frankly, I think it's becoming clear in the last 15 months. I don't know about you, but goodness me, we've been through a ride, haven't we? The second thing I want to do is then just talk about something that I've called the safety production and well at work model. It's my vision for where companies can get to. If we get all these elements in place, we can get to a place where companies can really get the value out of integrating wellbeing into their business models. I'm also going to be talking a little bit about culture and the role of something called psychological safety, so we'll explore what that is. And I'm also going to take you on a bit of a journey through implementing non-technical skills into the driver role, which is a piece of work I'm doing at the moment with MTR. So let's kick off by just talking about a driver. Now, Stuart is an experienced driver who's been working within rail operations for 27 years. He's worked his way all the way through ops, and he's now been a train driver within several different operating companies, both Fox and Tox, and he's now a driver trainer and assessor for a busy TOC. He's held a professional competency in train driving for many, many years. He loves his job and he's really well liked by his peers. He's one of the team. And you know what? He's one of those people who really cheers up the room. I don't know if you know somebody like that, but I'm sure you do. He's the real laugh. And he sees part of his job to cheer everybody up and, just to have a bit of fun at work. Unfortunately, last year, Stuart's dad passed away after a long illness. Stuart had so far been keeping up quite a brave face at work, but behind the scenes, he's feeling empty. And, he's becoming quite prone to angry outbursts at home, just more emotional than usual. And these outbursts are having a knock-on effect with his relationship with his wife and with his kids at home. And at the moment, he feels quite unsupported. Last Saturday, Stuart started his shift as normal after leaving his house, but he just had a blazing row with his wife. So he went out and he did his shift, and he was actually at the controls, showing somebody what to do when on the final stretch, Stuart passed a signal at danger. It's been about 15 months now since those days where Boris made his announcement that we're going to be staying home, and talked about this national and international emergency and put yet another layer of stress into our lives. He said, stay at home. And I can remember at that time shouting at the television, no, you can't send my kids home. I've got enough on my plate already. Some of us went out and continued to deliver at the front line, just like Stuart. Hats off to those people. They've had so much on their plates. I mean, frankly, I've not managed to get my laundry pile under control over the last 15 months. What people are doing out there is truly amazing. And we've all got these different feelings about what's going on. Some of us are, maybe jealous that they're not at home, maybe liking the normality and structure whilst working on the front line. Maybe they're worried for their safety, glad to be out and about. Or maybe you're one of the people that's been at home. And we've had lots and lots of different emotions over the last 15 months. And that's kind of natural, and that's okay. And for Stuart, dealing with, his father's grief, dealing with things at home, it can all start to really get to you. On top of those people that have been out on the front line, we've had those that have been furloughed, and we might have judgments about those people. Or were we jealous? Not having any work to do, maybe being able to go and, do some baking, make some sourdough, learn Japanese. But maybe it is that they've been missing their work, the social life that comes with it, and the structure that it usually affords us. Some of us were presented with a lot more people at home than usual, and this is me. Over that first week, I had to flip 4 weeks of training workshops into online events. I lost 12 months of future work. I was homeschooling one primary and one secondary year-old kid. I had to learn how to do Google Drive, Zoom and MS Teams all in 1 week, which broke my brain. But I was well resourced. I got through it, but it was okay. And then for some of us in lockdown, there was people who it meant prolonged isolation. Some of us were cut off from the people that mean the most to us. Sometimes not just physical isolation, but also mental. We know that lockdown has increased and exacerbated some of the mental health challenges amongst the population. and for some it's had the most ultimate cost. I'm sure that mental health issues have touched all of us in some way over lockdown, whether it's just managing acute stress, depression, anxiety, or other feelings that accompany the challenges of uncertainty and risk that we've been dealing with. Within our social group, we've lost 2 friends to suicide over the last 12 months. So we've been dealing things we've never had to deal with before. So I'm wondering, you know, what's been the most challenging for you during the pandemic? Has it been maintaining operations at work? Has it been dealing with customers? Has it been your team dynamics at work? Has it been you and dealing with your own feelings? Now, the bigger picture on wellbeing, this is pre-COVID, was that wellbeing was already costing our businesses an awful lot of money. So we were dealing with about 70 million full-time equivalent, 70 million full-time equivalent days lost from mental ill health. That's before we started. We know that things like presenteeism, so this is when you count people that are at work but aren't performing, that doubled the number. That's the impact on the UK. It cost each business about £1,500 per employee. That's an average. That's not just the people who were suffering, but this is an average across it. So it equates to quite a lot of money. And we know that the organisations that take it seriously do better. The Deloitte report, which was issued again at the beginning of last year, looked at this in a lot of detail and said the return on investment for wellbeing interventions in organisations pays back anywhere from 5 to 11 to 1. So, you know, it's a good thing to do. So what's this all got to do with non-technical skills and failure and all those other things I talked about? Well, what I'm trying to say is that the research says that wellbeing works. And what's happened over lockdown is that we're now got to the point where we're kind of starting to get it and starting to really see, you know, the sharp end, if you like, of what happens when people aren't well and aren't keeping well. The World Health Organization says that health is a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So it has that vision. This is what we're aiming for. And within the UK, we've got 4 key pieces of legislation there that protect those that suffer with mental ill health. So it's actually classed as a disability. So just in the same way as if somebody comes back to work with a disability, maybe they've broken their leg and they need some long-term care, we need to help those who have had mental ill health back to work in the same way. Now, that's okay, and these processes are coming into organisations and being worked through. But what I really want to talk about today is actually how we integrate and how we actually think about well-being and how we implement it in our organisations at a much, much deeper level. Now, this is our model of how a business should work if we get everything right. So there on the left-hand side, well, let's start at the bottom. So at the bottom there, we've got our business vision. So where is it we're going as a business? What things are important to us? And what's our current mission? So that kind of feeds the way that we design our organisation, the culture that we have, and the congruency that we try to get within the organisation. So the things that we try to align and make right. There on the left-hand side, we've got the things that we set up. So we've got our strategy, our policy and our delivery. And those are the things that we say that we're going to do. In the middle here, we've actually got this is what a high-performing team looks like. So we know that in a high-performing team, we need to have safe working practices. We know that that's important to us. We also have high performance. So we're planning to the delivery that we said that we're going to. But we also have this philosophy of having working well-being. So the people that we send to work can be well. So referring back to that statement from the World Health Organization, businesses that run this believe that we're looking for that balance of health being not just absence of disease or infirmity, but having this kind of holistic view of being well physically, mentally, and within a social bubble, because we know that those things are all important to us as human beings. Over on the right hand side of the model, we've got incident and trend investigations. So when things go wrong in that high performing team, let's say we have an incident or a near miss, let's say that our performance targets aren't there, or maybe we have high incidences of absenteeism. We can go and look at those on a reactive basis, look at those lagging indicators and say, okay, what can we learn from what's going wrong? What can we do to feed it back in that continuous learning and improvement green arrow at the top? We can also put in things like employee support. So within your organisation, you might have an employee assistance programme or a helpline, or you might have some mental health first aiders. So things that we can put in place to help people when things go wrong in a reactive way. But what we're saying in this model is not good enough just to pick things up when they go wrong. It's actually all about what does the strategy, the policy and the delivery plan look like, and being very, very cognizant of when those are the things that actually cause the harm in the first place. We're also looking at qualitative feedback and research. So this is actually looking at what other people are doing and what other people are saying works, and using that to our advantage. So this is best practice, right? So looking at external influences. So one of the things that we do is that we look at other domains. We had a picture of a soldier there on the first thing. So we take learnings from the military. We look at healthcare. We look at aviation, and we use these because they've invested time and energy trying to fix these issues already, and we use them to help us here. So we talked a little bit about what happens when things go wrong, and this is the first point I really want to talk about. It's about our reaction to failure. It's one of the most important things that a culture of a business can deal with. Nelson Mandela said, "I either win or I learn." There was no such thing as failure. I've learned that my webcam needs to be switched on somehow, but I just don't know how yet. That's a bit of learning I need to do. And it plays out at so many levels. And let me just talk about why. When that driver Stuart that I talked about in our story at the beginning of this session failed, when he passed a signal at danger, let's just think about what is the most important thing that happens as a result of that SPAD. Is it that he's put on observation? Is it that the signal is professionally sighted? Is it that he's taken off duties? Well, some of those are going to be useful, maybe going and doing a signal sighting if that is the issue, but let's go and talk to the guy, right? Let's go and increase our awareness of what's going on in his life. The work that I'm doing at MTR is looking at the link between well-being and incidents such as SPADs. And what we're finding is, and it's a predictable finding, is that when people aren't okay, they make more mistakes. We already know that if you're tired, you make more mistakes. If we're in a difficult environment, if the task is difficult. But how often do we say, actually, are you okay? Now, we already manage that in driver standards to some element, but I believe that we can go deeper. I believe, and this is kind of coming from the learnings from the military and healthcare, and this is what I'm going to share with you in a minute, that actually going a level deeper on looking after each other at work can really help. We're going to look at something called psychological safety. Now, some of you might have heard of this term before, but essentially what stops us sharing how we're feeling and what's going on with us at work is very similar to the situation we find ourselves when we mess up. So if we make a mistake, if we pass a signal at danger, we've got to disclose that we failed in some way. When we have a well-being issue, we've got to disclose that we're vulnerable, that we're maybe not 110% strong. And this concept of psychological safety has been one of the things that it actually creates high-performing teams. And we can only have psychological safety if we're in a culture. So let's say we're talking to our boss, if we trust the environment that we're in and we feel safe to disclose, so that we're able to show ourselves without that fear that something will happen to us as a result of that disclosure. Back in the playground where I grew up, it was that, you know, if I disclose this, then I'll get bullied or teased. That still happens in our culture, and sometimes it's well-natured and sometimes it's not so much. We all can drop into judgment far too easily. We love doing it. So what is it we really need to get a handle on here? Well, this is about the fact that organisational culture really matters with well-being, just in the same as organisational culture really matters when we're dealing with safety incidents and performance incidents. How are we going to get to a point where people trust each other enough to actually say what is really going wrong, where we can actually identify things and drive them forwards? So in the example of Stuart that we talked about, he didn't have anybody who he could talk to at that moment. Home life didn't afford him that listening ear, and at work he felt that his role was to be the cheerful, strong one, and as a result, he held it all in. And what we know from the work that we do a lot of work with mental first aiders here, is that just that simple act of having someone to listen to what's going on for you, without judgment, without necessarily solving the issue, is actually one of the key things that helps people move forwards and start to deal with what they're dealing with. In this case, Stuart's grief. Sometimes it's just finding a safe space where we can process the feelings and the emotions that happen when things happen to us. So psychological safety is so important, not just so that we have safe spaces that we can deal in well-being, but we're actually be able to disclose in a transparent manner what's going on. But, you know, and it might be it's about something at work. And a lot of the time, the stuff that's holding us back is about that fear that somebody's going to think that we're stupid. You know, I don't know about you, but, you know, for years I was afraid of putting my hand up in a meeting at work and saying, sorry, I don't understand what's going on here. Can you just clarify? I didn't, because I was afraid of being that person that was the stupid one, you know, back in the playground. So promoting psychological safety is incredibly important. It helps us in so many ways, and it actually helps to reduce risk. This slide is all about how that fits in. For some of you on the line who work in kind of safety and safety culture, you'll have heard of learning versus blame culture, and I'm sure many of others of you will have as well. Sometimes it's called the just rather than the learning culture, but I prefer the word learning because it actually says what it does. And down there on the learning culture, if you take the incident, right, that we're talking about, so going through a signal of danger, let's think about that as just an example. If we have a blame culture, something goes wrong, then fingers are pointed at the person, the last person to touch it. So people are the problem. In a learning culture, it actually says, okay, that person or the people around them, they're the problem solvers. So how can we stop this happening again? So it loses the judgment, and it actually uses the value of the people around the problem that actually know it, and they know it intrinsically. So we can start to think about, you know, rather than problems are headaches, but problems are opportunities to learn and to get better. So we're actually into this, when we're talking about this, what we want to do is iron out problems as fast as they can. That's how you get a high performance culture. So we fail forward fast. That's a quote that's used a lot. So the factors that I'm talking about there are that, you know, we want to be moving towards the left. So have a really good think about when things go wrong, where do you sit? Are you a right sider or a left sider? And nobody's perfect, right? And often we tend to reflect the environments that we work in. So have a think about where you are and how you could maybe shift a little bit to the left if you need to. Now, I'm now going to segue into non-technical skills, because one of the ways that we go and implement changing culture is through something called non-technical skills. Now, it's not the best name, right, because it doesn't actually tell you what skills they are, but apart from the fact that they're non-technical, right? So there's an issue here. It's people skills, right? But let's kind of delve into a few of them and what they are. Few of you online, I'm pretty sure, will know a little bit about non-technical skills, and some won't. So let's just kind of have a bit of a really quick look round. Now, this guy on the left is Martin Clunes, obviously. So if you watch Doc Martin, you'll know that this guy is a brilliant doctor, right? So his technical skills are A1. You know, he's like the A-star pupil from medical college. Unfortunately, his non-technical skills aren't so great. So his bedside manner as a doctor is terrible, right? If you want to go there and get empathy, you won't get it from him. You'll just get a diagnosis. So as a doctor, what I'm trying to point out here is actually the blend of technical to non-technical. Technical's great, non-technical not so much. The picture of NASA in the middle there. Now this is all about the fact that when NASA started sending people up into space, they employed, again, very, very good, technically brilliant people, but they were absolutely dreadful at team working and cooperation because they all thought that they knew the answer. So they actually couldn't take advantage of things like diversity of knowledge and expertise. And when you're solving complicated problems like getting in and out of space, actually having a diversity of different experience and knowledge is really helpful, because essentially you know different things and you can get synergy by adding all of that knowledge and skills together. That team on the right there, you know, think about the best team that you've ever worked for or played with. What was it about that team? Camaraderie, was it, you know, the cooperation? Was it the support that you gave each other on and off the pitch? What, you know, whatever it was, that's what we're talking about here. This is what we want to get to in organisations. So essentially, when we're bringing this back into train drivers, which is essentially what we're doing at the moment, is looking at the train driver competence and how do we mix up, or put together the technical skills and knowledge, the non-technical skills, and the functional skills. And the functional skills are things like, you know, they can do maths and, you know, read and all the rest of it. How do we blend those things? Now, RSSB did a lot of work on non-technical skills and the definition of them for different job roles. So the first 7 of those points there on the right are the ones that are published by the RSSB. So situational awareness, conscientiousness, communication, decision-making and action, cooperation and self-management. That's what they say are good for train driving. I've put in another one there, which is all about well-being, because this is what my company does. We look at how well-being supports the delivery of those other things. Because we know if we're not well, actually it's really difficult to show up and do those other things. So this is where we're starting with this. So let's take a bit of a quick kind of tour of the non-technical skills. Now, the main reason we need to not only have technical skills but non-technical skills is because of this thing called human error. Now, we're all human, we all make mistakes, some more than others, right? We know that things that happen to the human make us more probable. So kind of raise your hand metaphorically at me if you've ever, I don't know, flashed your windscreen wipers at somebody rather than your headlights, poured hot water into the tea caddy rather than to the mug with the tea bag in it. What else? Locked yourself out of your car, your house or your train. So human error is a natural thing. It's something that it's actually the thing that helps us learn. If you kind of look at the psychology of it behind it. Now, within an organisation, within the tasks that we do, and specifically we're talking about train driving here, there's going to be layers and layers and layers. Human errors are going to happen all day, every day. And the non-technical skills that we have can either set those errors up or not, and they can also help us to catch those errors when they happen or not. If you're familiar with the James Reason Swiss cheese model of failure, what we're talking about is the non-technical skills can help us create those holes or fill in those holes in the Swiss cheese model. So let's have a look at why or how that plays out with the non-technical skills that RSSB talk about. Now, let's talk about situational awareness. It might be a term you're familiar with, it might not. So it's situational awareness is about being aware of what's going on around you so that you're able to anticipate what could happen in the future. So in the context of the information I'm giving you here, I'm giving you a piece of information about my fuel tank, right? So we just got over a quarter of a tank of fuel. Now, that's just a piece of information, but it doesn't start to make sense until we put it into a situation and into context. So we've got the information, so we're perceiving it. We need to understand what it means. So let's give you a couple of contexts. So the comprehension bit is, for instance, I could be in my car, I'm just about to go and drop my daughter at a play date half a mile away, and then I'm going to come back. I'm going to look at that piece of information and go, yep, I've got enough fuel. So projection of future state is I can drive my car around to my friend's house and back again, no problem. If the state was different and I was just about to jump in my car and drive 400 miles down to Dean Valley Railway, let's say, and do a piece of work down there, then my projection of the future state was I need to go and get some fuel on the route somewhere. So then that would start me planning where I'm going to go and get some fuel from. So situational awareness is all about us processing that on an ongoing basis. Now, why is this important to well-being? Now, let's have a look at what happens when we start to load up, right? So we start to put some workload in there. Now, I want you to imagine that the amount of situational awareness that you can have is actually the capacity of that cup. So what's the air essentially that's left over in that cup is your situational awareness. So all the time you don't have much going on, you can have great situational awareness if you choose to. So you could, let's say, sit in your car and you'd be looking at the fuel gauge and have situational awareness, great. Now, if your workload starts to increase, your kid in the back starts screaming, your husband's phoning on the telephone because you've forgotten something and he wants you to pop down the shops, maybe you've got your best friend in the passenger seat, all that are, distracting you from the task that you need to be doing, which is maybe checking how much fuel you've got, they detract from your situational awareness. So that's how they're interlinked, essentially. Now, what we're looking at specifically, because this is the important one with SPADs, right, is what's that workload look like and how do we go about managing it? So if you're on a driving task, maintaining situational awareness, so taking in the information about what's coming up, what can you see, what knowledge you have about the route, what are you expecting to see, what aspects are coming up, what's the status of your train, what the faults on the train, what indicators have you got any systems that are showing any faults or trouble. All the time that you can just attend to that, you can do a pretty good job as long as you keep your attention and you're not fatigued and all the rest of it. If we then start throwing in workload, so pouring water into that cup, we can get a bit distracted, and we know a little bit about distraction. We've obviously kind of got rid of mobile phone distractions and having additional people in the cab. We've kind of dealt with that. But what about those internal things that are things that we're thinking about that aren't external distractions? So, for instance, worrying about what's going to happen to you when you get home. What mood is your wife going to be in? Does she want a divorce? Will I see the kids? All that stuff, right? So we know that our ability to deal with that stuff and either be able to park it or download it before we get to that safety critical task that we're doing is an important part of the equation. Now, let's have a look at what other industries have done, right? So there's one of the guys that I work a lot with is a guy called Andy. He was a paramedic in a search and rescue helicopter. And when he returned to, he went off and did search and rescue paramedic duties in Afghanistan, in the Afghanistan war. When he got back, his wife told him he was leaving, she was leaving him. Now, he took some time off as he needed to, but on his first shift back on helicopter, he said to his comrades, his team that he goes up with, he works very closely, he said, so this is what's happened. My wife's leaving me. Just like you to know that, you know, I'm okay to be here. I feel safe and well, but just know that this is happening. If there's you know, just know that I might have my limits, you know, just now, because this is happening. So that gave everybody in the team an awareness of where he was that day, just so that when they had to make decisions about who's doing what and how far we can push people on the team, because, you know, search and rescue is a big job, right? Then they knew what was going on for him. Midwives do this as well. So there's a little bit of work that Andy did with midwives, and they do a huddle and a cuddle. So when they start their shift, they have a huddle. So this is like your cost briefing, right? So briefing at the start of the shift. This is the stuff that's high risk. These are the high risk patients. Here's some current ongoing issues. This is what we're going on with resourcing. This is what we're expecting the session to look like. This shift to look like. The cuddle aspect followed straight after, which is, how are you? How is everybody? And it's an opportunity for the team to say, this is where they are. So some members of your team might be, yeah, I'm good, thank you. I've had a great night's sleep, had a good weekend. Da, da, da. And you might have people said, do you know what? I didn't get, you know, as much sleep as I wanted to last night. Things aren't going great with Bob, you know, all that kind of stuff. So you have, and you're checking in with your team. One, it makes them feel heard, but two, you have this transparency about what's going on. And it's incredibly helpful, because when you can, you know, if somebody halfway through the shift starts to look off it or maybe distracted, you know what's going on and you can intervene in the most appropriate way. And it's something also that paramedics at the end of their session tend to check in with each other, you know, especially if they're dealing with a lot of trauma. And I know that, you know, there's a chain of care support systems in drivers, but this kind of huddle and cuddle philosophy, it's, you know, it can be used in lots of different ways, with different language. It's just a really, really quick and easy way just to help. And actually what we're talking about here is communication and also cooperation and working with others, which is another couple of the non-technical skills. So communication, you know, we've got clarity about what's going on with people. We are listening to what other people are saying. We have the ability to be assertive. So, you know, it improves our trust in each other. So if we want to go and call somebody out and say, oh, I noticed that you've just done this, can I just check, is that the right thing to be doing here? And also, you know, we're sharing information, so the whole team is privy to the information that it needs to do a good job. What else? What else do we need to oops, no, I skipped one. What else do we need to think about? Another non-technical skill that we talk a lot about is conscientiousness. So this is the tendency to be careful, thorough, reliable, and systematic, right? Now, when we've been doing something for years, it's very easy to start to try to predict the future state of something, right? So this is what we call complacency. It's usually okay, you know, and if in the context of the train driver task, it might be, I've signed this route for years, it'll be okay. The last time I checked this isolation valve, it's always been fine, you know, the last 114 times, it's been fine. But actually, conscientiousness is one of our key mitigations against human error. We talked about the fact that we all make mistakes, not only us, but other people, right? And when you kind of delve into RAID reports and things like that, a lot of the errors that we see are actually errors that other people have made that haven't been found out through things like checking. Maybe that person's had a really bad day. Maybe their wife's leaving them or their husband or whatever. So conscientiousness is one of those key things that helps us to close holes in that Swiss cheese model. And it gives us resilience. It gives our teams resilience. It gives our systems resilience, because we're backing ourselves. You know, we're giving ourselves more opportunity for more to go right. So that kind of helps us in another way. Another of the NTS, of the non-technical skills that we have, is about decision making and action. Now, our brains have two main kind of operating modes, right? We've got the emotional one and the rational one. Now, the emotional one uses our very primitive brains. It's a fundamental response. So, for instance, fear, right? It's a fundamental response. We saw a lot of fear coming out when lockdown happened. You know, when Boris made his announcement, it was, oh my goodness me, big change. Lots of fear, lots of anxiety, lots of, you know, because it's a big change, right? And it's natural, because fear actually kicks us into action of, right, what do I do? Do I go and buy 17 pizzas? Yes, I do. And 76 bottles of, so 76 toilet rolls, you know, and you know, it made that panic buying happen. Now, it produces a state where, well, if you've ever felt upset, right, or overwhelmed or frightened, that's coming from the emotional center of our brains, right? It's a very, very strong response. It had to be in our evolution to get us to this point, right? It's really, really fundamental and very primitive. We also have this more modern part, which is our rational brains, and we use this to solve complex tasks. So this is the human version. You know, the emotional kind of primitive bit is there in lots of animals, right? But rational brains and complex thinking, it's only humans and a very few other mammals that can do it. It's all about integrating lots and lots of different bits of information. So, for instance, working out whether you've got to stop your train or not, it's quite complicated. You've got lots of rules and regs, you've got speed profiles, you've got route knowledge, you've got signal aspects, and you've also got all the things like, you know, trespassers and external things that might make you want to stop your train. So there's lots and lots of processing to go on. Now, if we want our drivers to make good decisions, we need to not only ensure that they're rested, but that they can actually actively engage with their rational brain, right? So this is where we circle back round to Stuart, the driver, and his ability to concentrate. If he's worried what's going to happen when he gets home that night, he's going to be less likely to be using his rational brain, right? So there's all sorts of stuff within these about well-being that's going to make him more likely to make a good decision if he can engage that. Now, talked a little bit about cooperation, working with others before, but you know, this is when we talked about the huddle and the cuddle. This non-technical skill is all about considering others' needs, supporting other people, treating others with respect, and maybe dealing with conflict and aggressive behaviour in the best way that we can. And we know that these things, you know, human beings are creatures that need to connect. You know, it's part of our anatomy that we need to. It makes us feel good. It means that we want to go and work together and achieve big things. So it's natural that would be one of the skills that we need. And just to kind of finish off with the two remaining non-technical skills categories, we've got the self-management piece, which is all about motivation, confidence and initiative, and maintaining our skills and knowledge. This is also about looking after ourselves, being prepared and organised. So these are the things that we need to be able to do in order to then go and do a great job. You know, when you go and talk to trade drivers, the most important thing is prepping your bag tomorrow and knowing where you're going to be, right? So that's about self-management. The keeping well piece, well, this underpins everything that I've just been talking about. It's about getting things stacked in your favour, looking after your physical body, looking after your psychology. So, you know, your physiology. Have you slept well? Have you eaten good food that's going to really, you know, give you good energy? Have you hydrated? Have you dealt with any medical issues? Looking after your psychology. You know, are you, you know, being mindful about what you spend your time thinking about? Have you gone and connected to other people? Have you got a support network to help you when things happen at home? And you can, you know, so you've got people there to support you in an emergency, let's say. And we also know that the keeping well piece is also about being involved in something bigger than us, so giving back. So maybe it's mentoring somebody, or doing some work in the community, or being a scout leader. You know, all these things are things that keep as well. So circling back to kind of like what we can do within our organisations, you know, very, very practically, you know, these are things that we can just instigate within our teams without even thinking about it. But if you're leading an organisation, have a think about actually how does this work within your organisation? Do these things happen? So things you can do now: talk about your feelings and share your personal challenges. Talk about and use failure constructively. We all do it. Rather than using it to castigate or judge, let's use it as an opportunity to open up that problem, unpack it, right? And we can use open-ended questions, so using a coaching and mentoring approach to unpack that stuff. Listening without judgment is another thing that's important. So that's psychological safety. Rather than jumping in with your view, just listen to what they're saying. Andy, who I work with, always says, you know, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Let's use them in the proportions to which they were gifted to us. Pick others up when they need support. You know, a lot of the work that we do is about teams, not about individuals. We need to go and support each other and pick them up, you know, and bring them with us. And the last thing that we can do is about sharing information on issues. So, you know, when we find a learning opportunity, let's share that failure. Let's share that as an opportunity. RABE reports are, you know, the ultimate, you know, share of what's happened. Let's use these to enrich and learn. And actually, where you get organisations where, you know, you get the old sweats sharing their experience and, you know, the ways to do things, the ways not to do things. That's where you get the synergy of all that experience being brought to those that have been in the organisation for less time. We call it tales from the rails when we work with our clients. So bringing all that together, this is all about, you know, very, very simple fundamental changes to how we interface with our colleagues, how we run our teams, how we deal with issues, and what processes we put in place. So asking ourselves, what is this process trying to achieve? And hopefully you'll be able to take some of these thoughts about well-being and use them within your organisations. So lastly, what I'd like you to do, I'm going to just take some questions now, if I can, but just have a think and grab a piece of paper. What are the 3 things that you've learned from today's session? Maybe nothing, maybe something. Maybe there's a little tip or trick or just a little learning that you can write down. So 3 things that you've learned from today's session. 2 things that will change the way that you interact with others. And then lastly, 1 thing that, excuse the typo, that you will do as a result of today. And actually, I'd really like to hear if there was if there was somewhere where we could feed that back, Georgia. That would be really, really nice, and have a few shares about what 1 thing you're going to do as a result of today's session. So that's all I've got of that. Be really, really pleased to take any questions that anybody has.
Yeah, thank you for that, Wendy. So if anyone would like to feedback any of the 3 things that you've learned from today's session, 2 things that will change the way you interact with others, and 1 thing that you'll do as a result of today's session, you could submit it as a question and I can read them out. And if you'd like, I can read them out anonymously. So we have got a couple of questions. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box and we will cover them. So 1 question we do have, 2 seconds, I'll just make the questions bigger because I am struggling to read them. Okay, so the first question is, what is CYA behaviour? That's from Scott. Me asked that quite early on.
I know, right? Cover your arse. It's a local okay. It's a local term that we use with our clients. That makes, it's covering your arse. Yes. Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And then Ben would like to ask, how would you check in and notice signs in other people when working as part of a virtual team? So obviously that's a new challenge that we're all facing at the moment. Whilst we might have been able to pick up on change of behaviours in the office, it might be a bit harder at home. So how would we handle that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It has been a challenge. it depends on your kind of role, but a few of the things that we've helped people implement over the last kind of 15 months are, you know, just that promoting the one-to-ones, you know, so promoting the one-to-ones, getting to the point in a relationship where people trust you to get opened up. You know, it's a journey, right? So knowing your people is your biggest kind of it gives you a massive advantage, right? Because, you know, you can have the chat. It's about knowing their signature, and I think that the problem is online is that signature is 2D, right? And we've got that. We've also got the differences that comes with the people that are either happy to disclose online and not. So it kind of creates another barrier. I know there's a lot of talking about things like extrovert versus introvert biasing on meetings. So a lot of people have, you know, taken, you know, don't like sharing online so that they stay more quiet, and that exacerbates the issue. So I guess the key thing is about knowing your people and doing, you know, getting to that point where you have rapport and trust with them, so you can invite a conversation. Now, the online thing is it's a challenge. If you have opportunity to go for a walk with that person, you know, go for a walk in the park or share a coffee, we can now do that if it's practicable, right? So look for those opportunities. My husband has literally just said, I'm going out for a walk with one of his colleagues who happens to live down the road. So they're meeting up for a quick walk now, because they know the importance of that, just because there's something about the screen that blocks free talking. You know, it's a very difficult place to get to. So I hope there's some tips and tricks in there, but it's a toughie. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's great. Thank you for that, Wendy. There's another question that we've had, which I think is quite interesting, is, are there any tips to make these subjects easier to talk about in a highly male-dominated workforce? Because as I'm sure you can appreciate, sometimes in more male-dominated environments, subjects like this can kind of be dismissed quite easily. So is there any advice that you give for how to tackle such topics in them kinds of environments?
Yeah. So the way that we approach it here is, so I work with a colleague, Andy Elwood, who's an advocate for men's mental health, and he role models. He's the guy I was talking about, the search and rescue helicopters. So he's been through some quite acute mental health challenges, some of it related to post-war, you know, trauma, so PTSD stuff. But I think one of the key things, and I guess this is a lady that's asking the question, that was an assumption. So I think it's about how do you bring role models into that, into the visibility of that team or that organisation. I've worked in, you know, male-dominated organisations my whole life, and I think it's about normalising it. So if you can find somebody to champion or to speak or to start the conversation, then that's got the confidence to do it, then it's kind of, you get that kind of, oh, you know, that quiet connection that it might be okay to think about. Now, we're not going to revolutionise and change culture overnight, but what we do know is that actually when you do get that connection, and it's often you know, men talking to men about it, you know, the conversations do flow. So that would be my advice. So bringing in some way, either in role modelling or championing somebody starting a conversation about it.
Yeah, no, that's great. That makes sense. Thanks for that. So someone has put in something they have learned. They love the use of the glass to explain how situational awareness can be affected by mental workload. So there's someone who submitted this, something they've learned from today's session. And as we're just nearing the end, someone's put in a really nice comment that I think would be really good to share with you, Wendy, just so that you know how well your webinar is being received. Heather has said, as a train driver of 15 years, I've been incredibly interested in the human factor aspect of the role, but I've been frustrated over the years by the fact that the only reading I could find was based on the aerospace industry. When the non-technical skills first started being spoken within the rail industry, I was hopeful that we were finally on the right track to gaining the insight needed to improve performance and reduce incidents. But NTS too often has been rolled out as a tick list and without the real connection needed with train drivers. I've been glued to this presentation as finally someone with an understanding of human factors and NTS has taken the time to understand the role of train drivers. This has been fascinating and gives me hope that we can finally acknowledge human factors and NTS within train driving, and more importantly, explain to train drivers how this affects them. So thank you so much, Wendy. So I thought that was a really nice note to end on there from Heather.
Oh, thank you so much, Heather. That's really appreciated. And yeah, I hope that I think it's about demystifying it. We did a training course last week for some train drivers in Network Rail, and one of the best things that was said was actually, oh, we already do this. Oh, thank God. Because I think we wrap it up in this language and what's the word, academize? I don't even know if that's a verb. But when we wrap it up in kind of fancy words, we lose the point of what we're trying to do. And that's not to say that we don't need the analysis in the academia, but we then need to make sense of it in our own language. We need to bring it into the actual tasks that we do. We need to spend the time making sense of it so that, you know, we can teach it and we can train it and we can embed it, you know, and those are the fancy words. But essentially, do people get it? Yeah, people know what communication is. They know what a clear communication looks like, because they do it every day. We know we have emergency protocol communications. But it's about wrapping it up and systematically finding little seeds that we sow into our days and change tiny little behaviors that become normalized. So, you know, if you're a driver trainer and you sow a seed with somebody about the way that something's done, and you make it so that person remembers that seed of that kernel of wisdom for the next 15 years, so that person then teaches it to 3 or 4 or 15 or 50 other people, that's how you get culture change over time. So it's about personalizing those little stories, like the one I told you about Stuart, finding those little stories that make sense to people, so so that they can take something from it and do something. And this is why this last slide is so important, because unless we all kind of come away and go, right, I'm going to do something different as a result of today, then this stuff is irrelevant. You know, we each have got a tiny little thing that we can do differently. It might be that you go and check in with your brother or your sister or your neighbour tonight because you've not seen them for a while. You know, this is, you know, well-being isn't about measuring stats and stuff. It is at a corporate level, but actually the stuff that we do is just about picking up the phone. It's just about being human. So that's really what I want you to take away today. So thank you, Heather, for your feedback. It's really, really, really gratefully received.
Great, thank you so much for that, Wendy. John, would you like to jump on quickly and say if there's any upcoming events this week that people can attend?
Certainly, thanks, Georgia, and thanks, Wendy. That was thoroughly thought-provoking. Every time I listen to you, I write reams and reams of notes. So I definitely echo what Heather said there. So thanks very much.
No problem.
Just to pick up that point that Georgia made there, there's loads of activities going on. Tomorrow is around diversity and inclusion. Today has been our Wellbeing Wednesday, and the obvious title of this session. So lots of things tomorrow to pique your interest. There's a talk from the LGBT plus inclusion teams over at BTP and Network Rail's Archway team. And we also have a talk from the Scouts, and it's not obviously something that you would think Scouts involved in rail safety, But if you want to find out more, then join us tomorrow at 1 o'clock. The BTP and Archway talk is at 3 p.m. and that's through Learn Live, and you can get all the information about that from railsafetyweek.org. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much for that. If anyone is interested, the recording of this session will be posted on the YRP YouTube in the coming weeks. If you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, thank you to our speakers. That was really, really interesting. And I hope you all have a good evening.
Thanks, Georgia.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, bye.